But the filter we're using is we've already painted a picture of where we want to go. Now, sometimes we will deviate, but we know we're deviating and we know why. I mean, if we're going to deviate, let's at least have the right conversations about why we're deviating and does it make sense?
It's all about the decisions that are going to be made. If you don't set up your team to make great decisions, if you set your team up so they have to come back to you every time a decision needs to be made, you are horrible at leadership. That is not leadership. That is being the star player on the team and just feed me the ball and I'll shoot every single time. That is never going to win a championship.
And you're not scalable.
No.
You're not scalable. And by the way, that's distracting you from the larger things you need to be focused on, right?
That's right.
You've got to empower your team, as I know you preach over and over, but empowering in my mind is, again, giving them the clarity of where you want them to go.
Yes.
And they're free to go there, but also put in that box, here's where we're not going to go. We're not going to distract ourselves.
Welcome to the How to Not Execute Your Strategy podcast. I'm your host, Tim Ohai. These are the lessons that make you the leader you want to be. Go to timohai.com to learn more. My guest today is Steve Thompson. Senior executives turn to Steve when their go-to-market strategy is producing disappointing business results. His expertise in sales leadership and negotiating gives him a special insight into one of the biggest threats to every business strategy, the deals that people make, both buying and selling. Steve pulls back the curtain on why so many leaders unknowingly sabotage their own strategies and what it takes to execute with clarity, consistency, and confidence. Get ready. This conversation is going to challenge how you think about execution. See the show notes for more information about Steve and to also get access to the leader guide for this episode. Let's get to it. Steve, it's so good to see you, my friend. It's been a minute, as we say, and I'm excited about where the conversation is going to go today. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Tim, and I tell you, I've really been looking forward to this. I know you and I have worked together quite a bit over the years, and we know each other, but this is a topic I'm really passionate about, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it.
Excellent. Let's get to it. So in your role, you have a variety of hats that you wear professionally, everything from being a business owner yourself. You've been an executive in multiple different roles in different companies. You've been an executive officer in the Navy on a submarine, listening to crazy things in silence and not telling anybody what you heard. What you're probably most famous for is you're an amazing deal coach and a master negotiator in the billion-dollar range for some very large companies. So I kind of want to take our direction down that path a bit today. I want to talk about how your experience as a master negotiator and executive opens your vision to seeing things that most leaders don't when it comes to their strategy. And I say that because you have taught me the starting point of any great negotiating is going to be something that most people don't even think fits. Would you take us down that path, please?
Sure. And by the way, my experience in the Navy doesn't have a lot to do with this because they don't negotiate. They're not big on that. But one of the things I learned in the Navy is how to remove the noise and focus on what's really important. And I didn't appreciate that skill until later on when I got into business. But going back to what you were talking about earlier, my space is pretty much what I'm going to call the last mile of a strategy. And what I mean by that is this. Lots of different companies say, Steve, we're having a real challenge executing our strategy. Or they may come in and say, we think we're doing really well. And what I ask the executives is, show me the deals you've closed the last 6 months. And then I'm going to tell you what your strategy really is. Because I use a visual when I think about strategy execution. I think about building a wall. That wall is comprised of bricks, and each brick is a deal. And if they're the uniform shape and they've got mortar around them, you've got a big, strong, straight wall. But if every deal is some odd duck, and suddenly this thing is wobbly, and that's what you end up with. That's kind of the area that I would focus in on is when it comes to executing strategy, I'm going to come at it from both the selling side, which is about half of my consulting business, but the same thing on the buying side. If you're not doing the right deals with critical suppliers, it can really impact your execution of strategy.
That's actually quite profound, because most people don't think of their negotiations as being part of their execution, and yet that is a major activator for both profitability and waste. And I don't mean
Yes,
waste just financially, I mean waste operationally, because if you get the wrong partnership with somebody, or you set up the wrong requirements or expectations on a deal, you'll literally hamstring your entire strategy after all that work you did to get there, and then you launch it in the field and they're going to fall all over the place, right?
exactly. And again, that's kind of what I use the last mile terminology on, because executing strategy for a business, and keep in mind, the vast majority of my experience is in the B2B space. Furthermore, my clients don't bring me in to work on little tiny deals. These are
Yeah.
what they call strategic deals, whether it's on the buying side or the selling side. And while they bring me in to help them position, negotiate, and close the deal, what inevitably happens is I spend 75% of my time saying, wait a minute, guys, why are we even doing a deal? What are we trying to accomplish? If this is our larger strategy, help me understand how this fits into that strategy. And then we go one level deeper in terms of granularity. This is something you spoke to earlier. If this is our strategy, what does a great deal target look like? Okay, that supports and advances that strategy. And that's an area that most companies don't think about. It's just, we've given you a
Yeah.
strategy, go out and sell.
Yeah.
And I wrote an article, or co-authored an article in HBR with a gentleman named Frank Cespedes from Harvard, who is fantastic. And by the way, the title of the article was Don't Send Your Sales Force Out Without a Strategy. It was exactly focused on this topic. And the example we used was a smaller company that I helped develop and execute that strategy. But to make it happen and to make it come alive, Tim, we had to paint a picture for the entire organization. These are the kind of deals we need to be doing to advance the strategy.
How often do leaders not have any clarity when you start asking these questions? Their answers are vague. Their answers are fuzzy. Their answers are hope and aspiration. What's the
Yeah.
reality like when you're talking to leaders about these kind of
Well,
things?
the reality is, and typically I'm brought in on the sales side by very senior, let's call it CRO level. There's a lot of focus on the top line number, the
Mm,
bookings, because we
mm,
got to hit the bookings number. And I get it.
mm.
That's what we're being measured by. But when I go, guys, when you look at the larger strategy, it isn't just bringing these dollars in, because a dollar's not a dollar. In certain buckets, it's much more valuable than
Yeah.
others. Furthermore, you do want a long-term relationship. The vast majority of my clients today are in the technology area, and it's a recurring revenue model.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? In a recurring revenue model, if that initial deal is a bad deal, you don't pay for it once, you pay for it forever. Okay.
Forever. I've seen them on the renegotiation on the renewals, and it's just like you're already anchored to the past with a dog around your neck, and it's not a nice one.
Think about this. The term strategy is very loosely thrown about. Sometimes
Yeah.
it means something and many times it doesn't. But I'll hear, well, our strategy is land and expand. I go, no, that's not a strategy. That is a sales execution. We're going to get
Yeah.
in the door, prove our value, and then grow. But the way they go execute is, let's say this is a huge multinational corporation. In that initial deal, they give the farm away on to get in the door.
Yeah.
And I go, okay, so here's the good news and bad news. Good news is you got a new logo. Bad news is, what if they really like our stuff? They're
Yeah.
going to want to buy a bunch more. And guess what?
They
You
want a
just
discount.
gave the farm
Yeah.
away on this
Yeah.
tiny deal, right?
They're buying at
You're
scale, the
toast.
price goes down, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're toast. And furthermore, let's just follow this thread for a second, because you didn't mutually agree with the customer, who the customer perceives this as a pilot. You didn't mutually agree on the success criteria. How are we
Mm.
both going to know that this pilot was truly successful? so that you can justify then spending a lot more money. They don't do that.
Is it basically people just reinventing their definition of the strategy? Because
Yeah,
if we go to the CEO and the COO and the CFO, I don't think land and expand is going to come out of their mouths. I think they're
no.
going to have a completely different verbiage, maybe even a completely different mental model of what the strategy is. So we're talking literally stuff is being made up just 1 degree of separation from the executive boardroom. And then on top of that, you and I both know the CRO has a perspective that doesn't get all the way out to the frontline manager. Look, we've got to hit our numbers this month, and I'll
Yes.
do whatever it takes to hit our numbers this month. And now strategy is not even part of anything. So
No.
you're talking about the most strategic stuff. This scales all the way through, and the waste that's generated, and not only the waste, but the frustration and the fatigue. It's got to be crazy across the line, no matter where you look.
Oh, no, it's literally insane. And again, I'll go back to the metaphor of the wall. Okay.
Mm.
It is wobbly. Look, we've put together deals that aren't advancing our strategy at all. One thing that you said triggered a thought in my mind, and I believe it's probably the most misunderstood aspect of strategy. And yet, I think it's one of the most powerful when it comes to executing, and that is a clearly articulated strategy doesn't just define where we're going to play. Most importantly, it defines where we're not going to play.
Wow.
Okay. Then you remove the distractions and the noise. When I have seen really poorly executed strategies, it's because we didn't clearly define where we're not going to play and waste resources and go off and do crazy one-off deals that are not something that you can scale, and they're a huge distraction and many times a huge suck of resources to service those customers. That is, to me, one of the most underappreciated aspects of any good strategy. It takes a lot of thought, but when you can clearly communicate that up and down the line, all of this is great, but if it doesn't result in the right actions at what I'm going to call street level, where business is being done, then it's not a clear strategy.
Give us a story of where you saw something go really badly. Then I'd love to know what you learned or what they learned from that
Yeah,
experience.
this was a client where they completely shifted the strategy from selling projects to what they learned was the real value were the services they provided afterwards. This was in the IT arena.
Mm,
Okay. And this was for a customer base that, were very IT heavy, but they didn't have the expertise to manage their infrastructure.
mm,
Well, these guys were used to selling laptops, servers, and everything else as a project, helping implement them and all that. But they developed this remote monitoring capability that allowed them to monitor. And by the way, the target vertical in this case was hospitals that I helped them hone in on, which hugely IT heavy, but they don't have the expertise to manage all of it. And I go, guys, this is where you can really scale this business and you're no longer geographically constrained.
mhm.
Okay. And where it absolutely took off, and this was much higher margin, recurring revenue, everything you're looking for, didn't clearly define that we are not going to do project work anymore. They still allowed them to bring in these huge distractions, which were typically small deals, and chewed up tons of resources. And then the strategy just started falling flat. There was
People don't realize
confusion.
how much the small stuff creates noise and distraction and waste, just like the big stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so in this situation, we didn't clearly lay it out as guys, we're not going to do that anymore.
Mm.
Okay. And so it was failing. And I got called back in and it was like, Thompson, we got a hot mess here. And it's like, okay, we're going to clearly define where we're not going to play, but we're not going to make it either or. It's going to be and, because we can use these projects to seed this ongoing revenue stream. And so what we did, Tim, and again, this is about clarity and getting granular enough that you can execute it. We said, okay, you can go after project work, but a component of it is 3 months of this monitoring service are standard in any project. What happened was customers saw the value of that service, right? And it was like a drug. They got hooked on it. So it was like the project's done, because the projects usually took about 2 months to implement. But we set up regular meetings with the key decision makers to make sure they were seeing the value they expected. And the next thing you know, they're all, wait a minute, we want to extend this contract for the monitoring. Again, we had to get that granular to execute it, and we had to get the noise removed. What ended up happening was the project work became the marketing vehicle of a land and expand selling motion. But the strategy was get them on this service. But again, I mean, boy, it was crashing and burning in a big way, because everybody has their comfort zone where they like to play, but it was just chewing up all the resources.
How did you get the leadership to change what they were thinking? Because a lot of times leaders will be a little too firm, too resolute in their direction, and they'll resist making changes to what they thought was the strategy. How did you get them to change their mindset?
Brought them into 2 meetings with 2 customers and let them hear, and again, from senior executives at those customers, where the real value was to them. And now look, these individuals had started and built this company with their own blood, sweat, and tears, and you and I have been there, and it isn't easy. It's not for the faint of heart. But the business had now gotten to a point where it did need to shift strategy because it couldn't scale anymore. It was too manpower intensive. It was too constrained geographically, and a host of other things. And senior management was locked in. Gee, Steve, we've been pretty profitable and we've grown it from here to here and all of those things. And I couldn't argue any of that. But I looked at them in the eye and said, okay, so are you okay being where you are now 5 years from now? Well, no. Okay. Well, all right. Can we maybe just explore that what got us here may not get us to where you want to go? All right. And I said, furthermore, would you agree, regardless of the strategy you settle on, if it doesn't resonate with customers, it isn't going to happen? As you can imagine, these are fairly touchy conversations, but just got in front, I got them in front of 2 executives because they were too removed from the customers was the big problem,
Huge.
Tim.
That's huge, right? So right now, anybody listening, if you haven't spent time with customers or your leaders have not spent time, quality time with customers in a meeting, talking about real stuff, not meet and greets and let me buy you dinner and talk about your favorite sports team or your family activity, but to actually get in and talk with customers about their world, their reality, you are not only missing out, you are creating risk. You are generating gaps. You are generating weakness in your strategy and how it's going to execute, because the decisions that will be made in the future are based on decisions that shouldn't have been made at all.
Yes.
If you were like most leaders, you learned how to execute strategy through trial and error, and your teammates learned the same way, if they've even learned it at all. The result is that how we execute our strategies generates massive waste and fatigue, but it doesn't have to be this way. If you'd like to master how strategies execute, go to timohai.com/masterclass now. You'll find everything I use to help my clients thrive all in one power-packed place. Don't you think it's time to invest in yourself? All right, back to the interview.
Yes, exactly. And I want to pull the thread on this a little bit further. If you're going to execute a strategy in a business, it is all about your customers at the end of the day. They vote with their wallets.
Yeah.
And we want them to open them up and vote more. I had another client helping them execute the strategy. This was I swear to God, it felt like a 1950s company, Tim,
Wow.
and the way they were organized and siloed internally. Yeah. And all of these heads of these different functional areas. I said, guys, you know what? We're going to implement an executive sponsor program because we've got key global customers, and you all are going to be given a handful, 5 or 6, where you're going to be the executive sponsor. And Tim, I got the biggest pushback I mean, the CEO was on board with it. Obviously, the CRO was on board with that. They were already executive sponsors with a
Yeah.
number of them, right?
Yeah.
But I had people who were heading up product, heading up services, like implementation services and all that, heading up support. And they're sitting there going, whoa, 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 Steve, no, no, no. I don't do customer facing. Then you have no idea how to execute a strategy because you
Wow.
don't know what that strategy is aimed at. And the end of the day, Tim, I will tell you this one didn't go well. It did not go well. They felt much more comfortable, what I call navel gazing, focusing
Yeah.
on our inside baseball stuff without any understanding of the implications, as you pointed out a moment ago, to the customers at the end of the day. And this is a case where it failed. I told them it was failing. I told them it was going to fail. I'm not happy telling you, and I'm not going to be happy if I'm right. But you guys are so removed from the customers. You're in love with your product, your technology, your business model. All of those are tools. They're not
Yeah.
an end game.
Somebody will eventually replace you, believe it or not.
Yes, and it did
Is
happen.
that company still around, or are they still spiraling?
No, they're still in a spiral downwards.
And just waiting for the inevitable. That's
Yeah.
so tragic. Let's go back to this concept of noise, because noise really is, if I get anything from our dialogue so far, it's the power of eliminating noise.
Yes.
And the one of the things that I heard you say was that noise is generated by not knowing your end customers well enough, because you will fill that echo chamber of silence with your own noise, and you'll be generating internally minded perspectives that have nothing to do with customer reality. And yet now it's a priority and everybody's going to be hopping and jumping to get it done. You also said lack of clarity, especially around what you're doing, what you're not doing. And I think prioritization it's the Achilles heel of strategy. I say it over and
Yes.
over again. If you don't know what priority 1, 2, and 3 are, then everything's a priority.
Therefore, nothing's a priority.
Correct.
It's like forming a committee, right? What's the purpose of committee? Nobody's responsible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll
Nobody's
kill
going
it
to
with
be taken
bureaucracy.
out and shot if their decisions are bad. So back to your point of clarity, I see so many strategies that don't have clarity, because without clarity, you can't execute. You can't execute. And so there should be clarity on where we're going to play. But there's that, like I said, underappreciated aspect of here's where we're not going to play. And in my experience, that removes a tremendous amount of distractions. And what you've got to arm everyone in the organization with, to me, a strategy is a filter. When I am confronted with choices, I put it through this filter and it becomes really clear where I need to focus and where I'm not going to focus, where I need to respond, what I need to address. But the filter we're using is we've already painted a picture of where we want to go. Now, sometimes we will deviate, but we know we're deviating and we know why. I mean, if we're going to deviate, let's at least have the right conversations about why we're deviating and does it make sense?
It's all about the decisions that are going to be made. If you don't set up your team to make great decisions, if you set your team up so they have to come back to you every time a decision needs to be made, you are horrible at leadership. That is not leadership. That is being the star player on the team and just feed me the ball and I'll shoot every single time. That is never going to win a championship.
And you're not scalable.
No.
You're not scalable. And by the way, that's distracting you from the larger things you need to be focused on, right?
That's right.
You've got to empower your team, as I know you preach over and over. But empowering, in my mind, is, again, giving them the clarity of where you want them to go.
Yes.
And they're free to go there, but also put in that box, here's where we're not going to go. We're not going to distract ourselves. I will give you some statistics here. And again, for your audience, yes, I work at the strategic level, but I get them to execute at the deal level. A selling organization who sells for a living, how often do they go into a sales cycle and then a subsequent negotiation to close a critical deal, and they don't know what a great deal looks like to them? How often do you think that happens?
Half the time.
A little bit over 75% of the time.
Wow.
Okay. Now,
Wow.
but
I was trying
but
to be
remember,
generous. I was trying to be generous.
a business deals between two parties.
Yeah.
How often do buying organizations, who, by the way, don't buy for a living, go into a strategic purchase, subsequent negotiation, and they don't know what a great deal looks like to them?
I got to think it's higher.
It is. It's over 90% of the time.
Wow.
Now back up and think about it for a minute. What do we have going on here? We got the blind leading the blind, right?
Yeah.
75% of the time, the sellers don't know what a great deal looks like. 90% the buyers don't. You know, the odds are, as we say, slim and none, right?
Yeah.
And Slim left the station. Think how much value you could bring your organization by having clarity on that. How much value would you bring your customers by helping them think through what a great deal would look like to them? It's huge, and it could be a huge competitive advantage.
It reminds me of a story, a negotiation I was a part of and trying to advise. Unfortunately, I got hijacked at the end by a very senior member of the executive team. We were negotiating with one of our suppliers. This is when I was still in corporate as an employee. This is not my consulting practice. Trying to get them to modify and to a degree even overhaul their technology platform to really be what we wanted. Their senior leader was like, this is in line with the vision we have for this company. This is our strategy. We want to be this. Fantastic. Let's become your test pilot partner and figure it out. If you'll give us a great deal, we'll give you some patience, but we'll also work this out together. So that was a negotiation that I had influenced to say, look, this is great for our strategy because we were looking for a much tighter connection with our customers that their technology enabled. And they were looking to be a part of the entire customer journey, not just one piece. And so that was great until, I won't even mention the role, but very influential member of the executive team got involved and suddenly made the deal about, well, do they buy us? Are they a customer of us? And totally hijacked the deal that they had to start buying us before we would continue to negotiate with them. And what wound up happening was all the value we had put on the table suddenly, silently was pulled off. And what we wound up with was not the deal that I would have supported. And I didn't know until it was signed that all this was done. When I saw the final deal, what happened to this? What happened to that? What happened to this? All gone because somebody completely changed the negotiation. It had nothing to do with the actual strategies involved. It was purely a knee-jerk cultural value that that person was trying to somehow protect. And I'll even question if that was even what it was.
Nope, I see it all the time, more often than I'd like to see. And you mentioned before about these degrees of separation. A second big reason why I don't see strategies effectively executed is inconsistent behavior from the top. If you communicate this is your strategy, you got to eat, sleep, and breathe it. When the going gets tough, you still got to stand by that strategy. And because everybody's watching you like a hawk, right? As soon as you deviate, you just told them the strategy was a nice to do. In reality, we're going to do what I want to do. And it falls apart. Now you have no guardrails of where we're going to play, where we're not going to play. You have no target. What are we aiming at to begin with? And the strategy falls apart. And I know you're big on not only we have to get in line, we have to empower, but man, there has to be consistency that comes from the top down to reinforce to everybody. It's like, no, I'm not kidding. This is where we're going. And we'll make tough decisions. We'll walk away from some business.
That is so good. That is huge. I'm actually wincing inside because I've seen how often the lack of that consistency, I'll even call it intellectual honesty. It's like, look, don't tell us on stage it's one thing, and then in actual meeting rooms, it's another. There needs to be integrity in the strategy that you as the leader or as the representative of senior leadership, you've got to be bought in on. If you can't do that, there's no way the strategy will execute. We're back into that breakdown, that spiral happening in so many organizations where there is no strategy other than the one I made up. And I made it up
Yes.
based off of how my leader acted, not because I was told to do it, but that's the one that just made sense to me. I'm not being a bad person. I'm just doing the best I can. And now let's go spend money, or let's go force our company to be committed to deliver something that may not be profitable, but doesn't matter because I'm following the strategy that I understand, which is why 95% of all employees do not understand or even are aware of what the actual company strategy is.
Yes, because the actions from the top do not reinforce it day in and day out. And another example along those lines are, look, here's our strategy. Let's say this is a huge strategic opportunity we're pursuing, and the customer is not going to be ready to buy until next quarter. That's when it aligns with some of their other internal initiatives. On our side, a senior executive, and again, I'm going to say I'm on the selling side in this situation.
Yeah.
Senior executive comes in, it's like, we're not hitting our number. I want you to go to them and we're going to give them a blue light special. We're going to discount the hell out of this thing to pull it in. And just like the example you shared, suddenly this becomes a transactional deal. And we signal to the customer, we're not serious about that strategy. We just want you to stroke a check for a certain amount at a certain time. Everybody in the org sees it and they're like, well, I don't have to go sell those kind of deals now.
The buyers wait till the end of the quarter because they know goodness is coming to them.
They're rewarded for it, Tim.
They're rewarded for it. Yes.
The reason that it's a hockey stick, right? Because there's 13 weeks in a quarter. And I sit down with my clients on the selling side, and you got to explain to me why most of our customers' problems are best solved only in the last 2 weeks of those 13. I mean, what are the odds?
Yeah.
I'm being really sarcastic here, but the point is we reward them for that behavior. But when you've got a solid strategy and a customer says, we're not going to be ready to close this quarter, that's fine. When you're ready, we'll be ready to move forward. Whoa. They're like, whoa, you are not a transactional salesperson or organization at all. You are looking at the larger picture of what this relationship could be. That's what I meant about you got to walk the walk. You can't just talk the talk because it falls apart as you get down to the street level where look, strategy is, in my mind, not of great value if it can't be executed where business is being done.
So well said, Steve. That's so well said. We've reached our time limit. I so appreciate the insights you've shared. I hope the audience appreciates this different lens, because the reality is execution happens at the deal level. Execution happens with frontline decision making that often has nothing to do with the actual strategy. That has to stop. Steve, thanks again for being on the show. And again, I appreciate you as always.
Tim, it's been a pleasure. And my friend, I'd be happy to chat with you anytime.
I hope you enjoyed that interview and got some solid takeaways. Here are 3 that I'd like to highlight. 1, every strategy eventually translates into a revenue number for sales or a budget number for spending. And those numbers become deals. Each deal is a brick in the wall of your strategy. And if those bricks aren't consistent and aligned, you're not executing strategy. Instead, you're literally stuffing your wall full of waste and underperformance as the result of those deals. 2, clarity isn't just about what you do. It's about what you refuse to do. A strong strategy sets boundaries. It defines what gets prioritized and what gets ignored. That kind of clarity acts like a filter. It helps everyone on the team focus, say no with confidence, and avoid wasting time on distractions dressed up as opportunities. 3, if your leadership behavior doesn't match the strategy dies. People don't follow strategy decks. They follow actions. The moment leaders start making short-term decisions that contradict the long-term goal, the team stops trusting the strategy. And without trust, execution unravels. In closing, there are 3 things that I would ask of you. First, Follow me on LinkedIn and subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter. You'll get even more content that will both challenge and inspire you every week. Second, please share this podcast with at least one other person right now. And third, hit those rating stars on whatever platform you downloaded this podcast. When you do that, it raises the visibility of what we are talking about to people just like you. Holo mua, onward and upward.